I know you've been there. You and your team are defending, and somehow, no matter what you do differently, every single round, the attacking team just gets the site for free because they're rushing with 5 people. They throw every piece of utility at you, you die instantly, the game gets boring and frustrating, the team's mental is in the sewer, and it feels like there's absolutely nothing that you can do to win. I've been asked over and over and over again to make this one video, and the truth is, I hate that I'm even making it, because I think this style of Valorant is probably the most boring, brain-dead way to play the game as an attacker. But I have to talk about 5-man rushes and how you can defend against them, because it honestly happens way too much in ranked. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what you can do about it. I'll explain why 5-man rushes even work, and I'll show you the 2 keys to successfully dealing with it to give you the best chances at winning rounds where it happens. I'll give you actual approaches to the problem instead of just vague advice like you should just use more utility. And I'll explain why those approaches work by diving into basic map and site design. To understand why a 5-man push even works to begin with, we don't need to look any further than PRX. Obviously, when you're in a ranked match, you're not coordinating the way that they do since they're a pro team, but they're a perfect example of why the 5-man rush even works. When you watch their gameplay, you need to understand only one thing. Everyone is doing their job. The initiators are scanning or flashing, the duelists are all creating space and breaking crosshairs as well as getting entry frags, the controllers are smoking off the exact moment they need to, and the sentinels are following behind putting down space-keeping utility on site. I get it, this sounds extremely simple. I'm basically telling you, hey dummy, just use more utility. But I want you to understand why it works so well in a 5-man rush. When you have 5 players barreling down towards you on site using 5 different agent utilities all around you, it's a nearly impossible task to fight that with just one agent's utility. Not even the strongest sentinels are able to do that. Usually, if you're playing defense in a normal round without 5-man rushes, you're not stacking a site. Most of the time, it's one player anchoring, maybe one nearby, and the rest spread across the map. That's important because when attackers are playing slow, defenders get time. Time to jiggle, time to hear footsteps, time to take a fight before the next person can help. That's how defenders can farm isolated 1v1s. You see one person, you take the fight, and their teammates are still a second or 2 away. But a proper 5-man rush completely removes that advantage. Now instead, imagine that you're site anchor. You're holding a choke, and now you're flashed, a drone tags you, 2 duelists swing at the same time. Even if you get 1 kill, you're almost always going to get traded. And a lot of the time, you don't even get a kill. You're usually forced off site or die way too early in the round to do anything useful. That's why 5-man rushes work, because you're asking one player to solve a problem meant for 3 people. And for those of you that are inevitably going to say, this doesn't mean anything in ranked, here's an example from one of my ranked matches that shows you exactly how it works. Look at how everyone is reacting off one another and everyone is performing their role. Neon is walling to get in quickly, Clove is smoking the second they notice the team is pushing fast, Jett is pushing in with Neon, Sage walls off spawn instead of default wall because Neon's wall already gets them in sight, Guy is flashing hell behind the team to turn defender crosshairs. We all have a role and we're all performing it. That results in the defense being entirely overwhelmed because they don't have enough people on site to stop it. And to illustrate the point even further, here's an example of a game where my team got absolutely rolled by a team hell-bent on getting onto site. I've slowed it down so you can really see everything. Gekko uses his flash, Jett dashes onto site in order to create some space, Clove notices this is all happening quickly and instantly smokes lines of sight so that everything is covered for the push, Vito throws his interceptor to prevent any defender utility from slowing them down, and to be honest, I don't know what the hell Phoenix is doing. Just ignore him and pretend he ran in flashing like he should have. So I keep telling you why 5-man rushes work, but this is a guide video, so what do you do to stop them? There are 2 key ways to really mess up a rush. The first way is a concept I introduced in a previous video of mine for attackers called layering, which works on defense too. The second is through something I'm calling lane advantage. So let's first start with layering. I made a video all about layering and how it works, but here's how I explained it in that video. Layering is the idea that you and your team should control the site in stages, or layers, instead of treating the post plant as one single fight. Each layer is a zone of space, backed by either utility or crossfires or timing, that the defenders have to deal with before they can even get to the spike. Think of the site like a path of gates, starting from defender spawn, moving inward. The first gate might be choke points into the site from spawn, the next could be the back of site, then the next could be the front half of site near the spike, then finally they have to deal with anyone sitting in main choke points from attacker side spawn using utility to prevent spike from being diffused like one-ways, mollies, or flashes. Every time the defense opens up one of those gates, they earn access to more space, which lets them clear different angles, trade kills, and apply pressure to the next layer. The good thing is that the concept of layering works both ways, especially for something like a rush. When you're defending a site, your goal isn't necessarily to entirely prevent access to all of site when you notice the attackers rushing. Your goal at that stage is to focus on the space that you can control and prevent them from taking that. You have to recognize what pathing attackers might take once they gain access to initial parts of site. So what does that even mean? Every site is usually built in a way where there's a choke point, a large object somewhere in the middle of site blocking access to defender spawn choke points, and then a defender spawn choke point behind that object, usually with an additional lane inside that site. If you look across multiple maps, you'll notice the exact same pattern on most sites. The specific details change, but the overall idea remains the same. So let's take an example. Let's say you're alone on site and notice there's tons of attackers rushing. Maybe they get access to the front of site through the initial choke point. I want you to focus on making sure that they have a a tough time gaining access to maybe the back half of site versus focusing on the initial choke point so much. You're not going to win the fight against a 5-man pushing through an initial choke point, but think about it from an attacker's perspective. Once you get into site as an attacker, as a 5-man rush, do you think that all 5 are going to keep pushing past the middle of site and into back site and into your spawn? Probably not. So usually someone goes to plant the spike, someone holds some angles for the planter, and maybe 1 or 2 players are going to continue advancing to take control of back site. Remember what I said earlier, when you're fighting a 5-man rush, you're asking 1 player to solve a problem meant for 3 or more people. If you're sitting in angles or peeking angles at an initial choke point when they're rushing onto site, you're asking to get traded or die. But if you keep space around other areas of a site, then you're almost always going to have 1 or 2 people alone pushing it versus the 5-man rush coming out of main choke points, which you're way more likely to turn and hold for your team. Again, I want you to think of the site as a series of layers or gates where you can filter out how many people you end up fighting as the rush progresses. The second concept for dealing with the 5-man rush is something that I call lane advantage. I don't know if that term already exists, but the idea behind it is pretty simple. Almost every single site in Valorant has about 3 lanes into it, sometimes 4, but usually 3. If you look at Haven, it's actually a perfect example. Every single site on that map follows this rule. Now, here's the important part. When a team 5-man rushes a site correctly, you are not going to hold every lane. That's just not realistic. You're going to give up at least 1 lane into the site, and a lot of the time you're probably going to give up 2 as a team scales. Watch this example on Haven. The attacking team in a 5-man rush gets on site, kills whoever is there, but then continues to push to take control of the 3 lanes they have available into site. They're playing the lane advantage. Neon goes into garage, Vice and Deadlock are locking down the lane from spawn, and Yoru is holding down long while Sage is floating between helping with garage and spawn control. As a defense, you need to do everything you can to keep control of as many of those lanes as you can. Once attackers get into a site, your retake is only as good as the ownership you have over each lane. If your team only controls 1 lane, like this example where defenders only control spawn, then your retake becomes way more inefficient because you're having to re-clear every other lane as you work your way back into site. So if you're finding yourself constantly having to pull back and play retakes because of the 5-man rushes, ask yourself as an individual player on the team, what lanes do we own right now and how can my role help recapture specific lanes? Your goal once you get hit with a 5-man rush and they have access to site is to strictly focus on the lanes you lost access to because of the pressure that they applied. If they're 5-man rushing, that means that most of them flooded through 1 lane. And in theory, that means that all 3 lanes are up for grabs as they've rushed into site. I already know that some of you might be thinking that this is overcooking, and I'd bet money that someone is going to jump into the comments and tell me it's not that deep and nobody does this in higher elo. But they do. They just don't consciously think about it, and it's become an intuitive part of the game for them to play this way and act on instinct versus thinking about which lanes they own or don't. These ideas are meant to help those that maybe don't think about this intuitively, so that you can really start to think round to round and game to game. I hope you found this helpful. Would love to hear from you in the comments if you did. If you didn't, tell me in the comments why. I love arguing about this stuff too. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really helps the channel. And as always, I appreciate you watching. Catch you in the next one.